Australia plunged into its first recession in 3 decades. It's the worst on record. So what does it mean for your money? Another deadly police shooting inflames racial tensions in the US as Donald Trump declares domestic terror for the unrest in Wisconsin. A country crying out for change. Emmanuel Macron declares this is Lebanon's last chance. And game on at the Gabba, the AFL Grand Final to leave Victoria for the first time in the sport's 123-year history.
This is SBS World News with Janice Petersen.
Good evening. Australia is now officially in recession, the first in almost 3 decades, with a further 400,000 workers expected to lose their jobs between now and Christmas. While the government has called this the COVID recession, the opposition says it will be longer and deeper because economic stimulus was rolled out too late and is being wound back too soon.
History in the House for all the wrong reasons.
This is a devastating day for Australia. Our Australian economy has been savaged by the COVID-19 global pandemic and recession.
After dipping 0.3% last quarter, today GDP plunged 7%, the largest ever quarterly fall, marking the start of Australia's first recession since 1991.
Our record run of 28 consecutive years of economic growth has now officially come to an end.
The COVID-19 lockdowns collapsing discretionary spending, services, imports and exports as household savings soared to 19.8%, its highest level since 1974.
The largest fall in household consumption on record.
The transport, hospitality and clothing sectors suffering the biggest hit as alcohol and home furnishing sales spike.
This is a tough period, but it's much tougher in many other parts of the world.
Well, we're doing better than Donald Trump's America. That means nothing to people who've already lost a job.
3 times the size of our economy's previous biggest fall, the Treasurer says without government support,
700,000 more jobs would have been lost.
Prompting Labor to ask,
isn't this the worst time for the Prime Minister to be cutting JobKeeper?
He says JobKeeper should be extended, but it should be transitioned. He said it should be higher and he says it should be lower, Mr Speaker.
As a generation that has only ever known economic growth wonders what happens next.
Given these are the worst numbers on record, will this be the worst recession in Australia's history?
Well, it's a different recession to previous recessions that we've seen in Australia. It's faster and deeper than what we saw in the 80s and 90s. After those recessions, it took longer than we certainly are hoping for people to get back to work.
With the government leaning towards fast-tracking income tax cuts and delaying legislated increases to superannuation, one thing is clear: skilled migration will be central to Australia's health and economic recovery. 17 professions given high-priority migration status in critical sectors, including chief executives, psychiatrists, GPs, midwives, registered nurses and software engineers.
The real challenge for this government is to outline how they're going to provide the skills and the training for Australians to fill those skill gaps.
The government's so-called road to recovery.
Tough day for the country, Treasurer.
Absolutely.
Now a fight back, not a snapback.
Australia will not resign to this virus, Mr Speaker, and our economy will not resign to this virus.
Brett Mason, SBS World News.
SBS Finance Editor Ricardo Gonçalves joins me now with more. Ricardo, how does this recession compare with previous ones?
Janice, this recession was deliberate in that the economy was shut down to limit the spread of a health crisis. The recession we had to have in 1990-91 followed a period of corporate excess and super high interest rates. While there have been some quarters of negative growth since then, never 2 in a row, keeping Australia's economy expanding every year for nearly 30 years until today. The average person generally feels a recession by lower incomes and job losses, although government stimulus has softened some of that blow for now. And while the worst on record, Australia's 7% quarterly contraction is better than many other advanced economies around the world. But remember, different economies dealt with the varying stages of the virus at different times.
When we think about the policy response, there's a whole range of issues which are relevant here. What sort of logistical measures, logistical tightening you undertake to limit the spread of the virus, how effective your health response and your track and trace is, and then how effective and targeted the economic response is on the other end in response to those health policies that you've taken. I think Australia's done a relatively good job actually on all of those, and more importantly, has it learnt as it went along. The government's initial stimulus was too small, but they recognised that quite quickly and started to come in with some much bigger stimulus efforts.
The big question is what happens when that stimulus is unwound? And Janice will have more on that later in the bulletin.
Thanks, Ricardo. We'll see you then. Victoria's state of disaster has been extended to September 13 to run in tandem with the state of emergency. But the Premier has made it clear that although those measures are due to expire on the same date, restrictions are likely to continue. Victoria recorded a double-digit increase in COVID-19 cases. There were 6 deaths. New South Wales reported 17 infections overnight. Queensland had 2.
Victoria's testing blitz losing steam. A drive-through clinic in a northwest Melbourne hotspot with more staff than clients. A week ago, over 25,000 were getting tested daily. Today, that's halved.
Please, if you've got any symptoms whatsoever, come and visit one of the more than 190 test sites across the state.
Plans to end lockdown in doubt, with over 50% of those with symptoms not getting tested.
Because some of those symptomatic individuals will have coronavirus. They're not showing up in our numbers because they're not coming forward.
The Premier won his bid to extend state of emergency powers at 2 a.m, with the unexpected appearance of Greens leader Samantha Ratnam from maternity leave, the opposition accusing the government of dodgy backdoor deals.
What was the Greens' price for giving Daniel Andrews a 6-month blank cheque?
The Premier also extending the state of disaster to September 13, but warning neither measure will expire on that date. The state now has 2,415 active cases, over 100 fewer than yesterday. 406 in hospital, 18 in intensive care and 13 on ventilators. The new deaths taking the state's toll to 576. Cases of unknown origins averaging 15% daily.
Some are urging that we should open up right now. And if we did, well, it'll be a couple of weeks of movement and then these case numbers will explode.
Little was revealed today about the future for restaurants and retailers in Melbourne. The Chief Health Officer indicating measures like curfews and mask wearing could continue for up to a month. The government now on a 4-day deadline to unveil its plans to reopen the city.
Many retailers and small businesses particularly have mortgaged their homes to keep their businesses going. So we're really in the pointy end here.
Everything's on the table, nothing's off the table. It'll be a consideration to continue.
Security subcontractors have told the Hotel Quarantine Inquiry that carpooling and shift changeovers could have led to infections between guards and denied claims up to 70 were crammed into a room during handover.
There wasn't 70 people in that room. That room is no way capable of carrying 70 people.
Sterling Security denied claims guards were told to reuse PPE, but admits there was no agreement that they shouldn't work at multiple locations.
There was no formal restrictions to the guards not to go and work somewhere else.
Outbreaks at the Ridges and Stamford are blamed for the state's deadly second wave. Abby Dinham, SBS World News.
The New South Wales Premier has expressed relief that her worst fears about coronavirus haven't materialised. Of the 17 new cases recorded in the last 24 hours, 16 are connected to existing clusters of the virus and 1 case is in hotel quarantine. Gladys Berejiklian says she wants more people across the state to wear masks.
It is a better way not only to keep yourself safe, and especially younger people who have a less tendency to wear them. Not only is it about you, it's actually about everybody else around you.
The Premier says masks should be worn on public transport, in supermarkets and in places of worship. And Queensland's Health Minister has praised the actions of a nurse who underwent testing for COVID-19 after experiencing abdominal pain, a rare symptom of the virus. The tests came back positive. The state confirmed just 2 new cases today. Both are linked to existing cases. US President Donald Trump has described protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin as acts of domestic terror during a controversial visit to the Flashpoint city. The outrage over racial injustice that has gripped Kenosha has now spread to Los Angeles after police shot and killed another black man.
Touching down in Kenosha, Wisconsin, defying pleas from local leaders to postpone. US President Trump surveying areas damaged during protests, speaking with some business owners and thanking police. No meeting with or mention of Jacob Blake, still in hospital, feared paralysed after he took 7 gunshots in the back from officers as his children watched on in horror.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
The self-proclaimed president of law and order pledged almost $50 million to bolster Wisconsin's law enforcement as he defended the police.
I think the police do an incredible job. You have some bad apples and you have people that choke.
And dismissed claims of systemic racism in his country.
These are not acts of peaceful protest, but really domestic terror. To stop the political violence, we must also confront the radical ideology that includes this violence.
President Trump again repeating an unsubstantiated claim for which he provided no evidence that left-wing agitators backed by rival Joe Biden had planned to travel to the Republican convention to incite violence.
The entire plane filled up with the looters, the anarchists, the rioters, people that obviously were looking for trouble.
The president's arrival in Kenosha met with cheers and jeers from opposing groups. Pro-Trump supporters and Black Lives Matter protesters, as Jacob Blake's family vowed to continue their fight until the officers face prosecution.
We're not leaving Kenosha area until we get justice for little Jake. We want to not just an indictment, we want a conviction.
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
In South Central Los Angeles, similar demands. Peaceful protests gaining momentum over the death of Dijon Kizzee, shot more than 20 times by officers yesterday.
What are you doing now?
After he ran away over a code violation on his bicycle. Police claim Mr. Kizzee punched an officer before dropping a handgun as he fled. His family crying murder.
They don't kill any other race but us, and it don't make any sense. Why us? You have Asians and the Hispanics don't even get killed as much as we do. It's just us, and we're tired.
Critics comparing Mr. Kizzee's treatment by police to Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, who last week freely walked past police with an assault rifle strapped to his chest after he had shot and killed 2 people. Omer Dihan, SBS World News.
French President Emmanuel Macron has given Lebanese politicians a 2-month deadline to start delivering on reforms or face sanctions, including a freeze on international aid. His visit to Lebanon, which was once under French rule, coincides with the centenary of the country's creation. But many are sceptical of President Macron's ability to bring about the change he seeks.
This is how Lebanon is marking its 100-year anniversary. Protesters attempting to storm the parliament as frustration over decades of corruption continues. Security forces responding with tear gas and rubber bullets. But the people remained defiant. There is not much left to fight for in Lebanon. But if there is ever going to be change, now is the time. The hope is that this man can help usher it in. French President Emmanuel Macron's latest visit, coming 100 years after the formation of Lebanon under French rule. But he's not here to celebrate, instead delivering an ultimatum. Combat corruption and reform the political system by the end of October or face sanctions.
Rien n'a été fait. Et à ce moment-là, c'est clair, je devrais dire à la communauté internationale, nous ne pouvons pas
être au rendez-vous de l'aide au Liban.
President Macron saying it's the last chance for a country that has crumbled under its complex sectarian structure of government, where power is split between 18 religious sects. The system adopted at the end of the Civil War to guarantee stability. But many say it's at the root of the dysfunction. The August 4 explosion in Beirut seen as the most consequential manifestation of that mismanagement. Rita Hitti lost her son-in-law, her nephew and her eldest son in the blast.
ركضنا تنوظفهم تما يسافروا لبرا. يعني قدرنا نحن الأمات هون أو نبكي على المطار أو نبكي على أولادنا بس يموتوا.
Parents now willingly sending their kids off. The explosion the last straw for many. Google searches in Lebanon on how to immigrate hitting a 10-year high. President Macron initially hailed as a potential saviour for Lebanon. He vowed to push for change during his first visit in the days after the blast. But his return comes in the face of a wave of scepticism. Some Lebanese see him as backing the new Prime Minister Mustafa Adib, who is regarded a product of the system that has let them down for decades. Abby O'Brien, SBS World News.
Coming up next, Tony Abbott says some uncomfortable questions need to be asked about COVID-19 restrictions. The comments, which critics say are a new low. Also, does the warmer weather impact your chance of catching the coronavirus? And a New Year's Eve like no other. Will Australia's biggest party still go ahead?
Tonight at 7:30, we uncover life in the Arabian Peninsula through the stories of its people in Arabia with Levison Wood. Then take part in the manic maintenance at the Metro in Sydney's Supertunnel, followed by the Tour de France Live Stage 5.
My first time that I put my uniform on, you can't even explain the magic that you feel. You're just so proud.
Behind the walls of a British institution.
For me, it's about the legends and the myths and the stories that we tell here.
Gory secrets and tawdry tales.
It is said Raven started pecking at the eyes of Lady Jane Grey's head just moments after her execution.
We're here to make sure history never dies.
Secrets of the Tower of London. Starts tomorrow 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
The garden is my happy place. This is where I come to relax. It gives you a sense of pride when you see, the roses bloom and the broccoli grow, and it's a pleasure when I can do it with the grandkids. I think it's important for them to learn, and if we can pass these things down, it's great for them. If they were to give me a present for Father's Day that would sit in my garden, it'd be something that we could all share.
Shop online for your dad. It's like having the warehouse at your fingertips.
Here she is, the next generation of Aussie dairy farmer, passionately continuing a 120-year tradition of care. Dairy farmers, here's to good.
He did promise to keep her company. Was it rude to wake him? Maybe. Thank you, Roads of Australia. The Toyota RAV4, the return of recreation. Oh, what a feeling. Toyota.
I've been thinking, change it up. No, stay the course. It's all about managing cash flow. Or is it investing, diversified? Wait, why did I even get into this?
Andy? Let's work through this one step at a time.
If you need help working out your next step, search ANZ Business Planner.
If you're looking for something special for Father's Day, he'd love something from Bunnings.
Ryobi 1 Plus blower kit, only $199.
Whatever your father is into, we have him covered at Bunnings.
Bunnings Warehouse. Tell me something.
My son was responsible for the death of 4 innocent kids.
I just want to know something.
Do you think you would ever cheat again?
I just want to know something.
For 43 years of my life, I was in a cult.
My skin criminalises me.
I even tried to pick up Australian accents.
Monday nights have never looked so tight.
If you want to play along at home, you've just got to get yourself a pen, some paper and a life.
It's a brand new season of 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown. Starts Monday 9:30 on SBS and on demand.
The UN says it's received hundreds of reports of torture, beatings and mistreatment of protesters in Belarus as the unrest triggered by the country's disputed election result continues for a fourth week. More than 6,500 people have been arrested, but demonstrators remain defiant. And now students are taking up the fight.
Being barely older than a teenager makes no difference to Belarus's masked security forces. But these students in the capital, Minsk, stood their ground peacefully, ignoring warnings that their rally was illegal and to go home. So, with no obvious leader, the security forces picked on those at the front and started making arrests. Thousands of students at several colleges in Minsk answered a call by opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya to boycott the start of the school year on Tuesday morning.
We came to support the people, to show our political stance and to demonstrate there is no need to stay at home, to be afraid. We are here, we are all here.
Tikhanovskaya, now exiled in Lithuania, wants a new presidential election. The re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko on August the 9th provoked protests ever since. He says he won 80% of the vote. The opposition says the result was rigged. There's not much sympathy for the opposition from the Kremlin, nor for the Baltic states that have spoken out against Lukashenko.
We see no one is trying to hide it, that our Lithuanian neighbours, in my opinion, have crossed all lines of decency in the demands they're putting forward. We have reason to believe that they, along with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, are using not completely democratic methods, which don't exactly respect the sovereignty of the Republic of Belarus.
On Wednesday, Lukashenko declared over what he called the eventful summer. But that looks premature. And now Washington says it's considering sanctions on Russia if, as a senior US official put it, Moscow were to intervene more overtly in Belarus.
Facebook says a Russian operation posed as an independent news outlet to target left-wing voters in the United States and Britain. Facebook says the setup centred around a pseudo-media organisation called Peace Data. It says the group partly focused on US politics and racial tensions in the lead-up to the November 3 US presidential election. The website reportedly pushed messages critical of right-wing voices and the centre-left. It operated 13 Facebook accounts and 2 pages, which were set up in May and suspended on Monday for using fake identities. The Kremlin has denied any involvement in the operation. In a rare show of civil disobedience in defence of their minority culture, large protests are taking place in the Inner Mongolia region of northern China. The demonstrations were called for after Beijing told local schools that Mandarin Chinese would gradually replace Mongolian as the language used in a few key subjects.
It's the first day of school in Inner Mongolia, a few hundred miles north of Beijing, but many classrooms are closed, amid what may be the biggest wave of protests the region has seen in decades. Protect our mother tongue and culture is the rallying cry of Mongolians boycotting their education system. Beijing insists it wants an hour of Mandarin Chinese taught in Mongolian schools daily from today. There's no suggestion the Mongolian language will be banned, but Chinese lessons in history and politics will soon follow. All subjects will be taught in Chinese, this woman cries in response. We cannot accept this. Wake up, Mongolian brothers and sisters. Yesterday, students burst through police barricades, claiming they would never accept the assimilation Beijing may have planned. This protester said he had been beaten and then thrown into a police vehicle like a pig for slaughter. Though he was later released, the suppression of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and the people of Tibet provide a worrying guide as to just how far President Xi's drive for a uniform Chinese state could go.
Well, there is practically no chance of Xi Jinping backing down. He is a strong man in a very hard authoritarian system, imposing policies that are becoming increasingly totalitarian. If he backtracked on any policy, it will be seen as a demonstration of weakness.
This Mongolian school, parents filmed the head teacher as they urged him not to accept any bilingual education policy. Ethnic Mongolians comprise just 17% of Inner Mongolia's population, and their language is the greatest symbol of what they fear is a dying way of life. Let us Mongolians be who we are, they sing. Several of these videos have since been removed from Chinese social media sites, and it seems very unlikely President Xi will reverse course or tolerate this dissent for long.
Foreign Minister Marise Payne has admitted that the government's international arrival cap has made it tough for Australians to return home, but says it remains in place to protect the community. More than 379,000 travellers have already returned home since March. Ms Payne revealed about 30,000 Australians have registered as being overseas, with 2/3 indicating they'd like to come home.
We acknowledge that domestic caps are making it harder for people to return, but we do ask that Australians understand that there is a balance which has to be struck in these circumstances.
The Foreign Minister says the cap is regularly being reviewed. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott has come under fire for his comments about the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Calling for an easing of coronavirus lockdowns, he launched an attack on what he calls virus hysteria. He was speaking in London, where his expected new role as a British trade advisor has also drawn criticism.
On a day where he had plenty to say, Tony Abbott went to some effort to avoid being snapped as he travelled between London engagements. First stop, a think tank, where he criticised what he has dubbed virus hysteria. Mr Abbott questioning the amount of money spent by the Australian government to soften the economic consequences of lockdown measures, given the average age of COVID-19 victims.
Even if mandatory shutdown really was all that avoided the initially predicted 150,000 deaths, that still works out at about $2 million per life saved, or substantially beyond what governments are usually prepared to pay for life-saving drugs. Shouldn't we have started to ask whether the cure was proportionate to the disease?
Back in Australia, the comments earned a swift rebuke from the opposition leader.
Tony Abbott was never known for his compassion, but this is a new low.
While the current Prime Minister defended his former colleague.
I do not understand that that was the intent of the Prime Minister's statement.
Mr Abbott also took aim at Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews.
And the Premier now wants to extend this health dictatorship for at least another 6 months.
And railed against lockdowns and travel bans.
Governments have justified it as following the expert advice, as if this has always been clear, or as if we should be ruled rather than merely guided by unaccountable experts.
Speaking to a British parliamentary committee, the former Australian leader confirmed reports he's in talks to become a UK trade advisor.
It's something which is not yet official, and I really don't think there's any more I can say until things have been decided.
Mr Abbott is a controversial choice for the job. Britain's shadow trade secretary has described him as an offensive, leering, cantankerous, climate change denying, Trump worshipping misogynist. And now a government MP is speaking out.
He's a misogynist. He has very poor views on LGBTQ rights, and I just don't think this is a man who should be anywhere near our Board of Trade. Is he the sort of man I want to be representing us globally? No.
Asked to respond to the criticism, Mr Abbott said it's just part of public life.
Inevitably, if you have convictions, you'll draw criticism. But if you want to get things done, you need people with convictions.
As for how he was able to travel to Britain, he said he'd applied for an exemption from the government and will pay for his own quarantine when he returns to Australia. In London, Ben Lewis, SBS World News.
The Deputy Chief Medical Officer has warned against COVID complacency as warmer weather approaches. Dr Nick Coatsworth says it's still unclear if coronavirus will be less transmissible during the summer months as influenza would be. He says an increase in crowds outdoors could bring potential risks.
So the message is, as we move into the summer months, treat the summer with as much caution as you've treated winter. And that means keep physical distance. That means get tested if you're at all unwell. Don't go to a family gathering down at the beach if you're unwell or the kids are unwell.
Dr Coatsworth also urged vigilance for people moving between cities at all states during the summer. He says travel during these months in Europe was a key driver for cross-border infection. Sydney's iconic New Year's Eve fireworks could be the next casualty of the coronavirus pandemic as pressure mounts for the event to be cancelled. More than 1 million people turned out to watch last year's display, and authorities say it will be impossible to enforce social distancing for crowds of that size.
It's Sydney's biggest party. Now, for a second year in a row, it could be in jeopardy, this time due to COVID-19.
The risk is far too high.
As calls ramp up for the world-famous fireworks to be cancelled.
How can you attract 1 million people to the harbour shores and do it in a safe way? We know it won't happen.
Last year, visitors flocked from across the world to Sydney Harbour to watch the display, despite calls to cancel the $6.5 million event because of the bushfire crisis. This year, the New South Wales Premier says it's still possible.
But it will be different. We can't entertain all those thousands of crowds. I'd like to see it go ahead in a COVID-safe way.
There are ways in which we can create safe gatherings.
A move backed by the business community who've struggled to stay afloat.
If there's ways that some of those businesses can still get some benefit in socially distant, safe way, then I think those businesses can still get a way through.
The spectacle pours in over $130 million to the local economy, with billions of viewers worldwide. But others say if regional events have to pull the plug, Sydney should too. The Sydney Lord Mayor who runs the event said it would be incredibly sad if the fireworks are cancelled, but it's a real possibility, saying it wouldn't be responsible to encourage large crowds to gather at the foreshore, leaving that to the police and the state government. A joint task force will be set up to make the final decision.
And I think for a lot of people, the fireworks represent a sense of hope, and not just for Australia and New South Wales, but for the world.
It brings a lot of money to the economy, so I think we should go ahead.
And just do the fireworks and televise it.
Melbourne, Brisbane and Adelaide are still considering whether their New Year's events will go ahead. Nakari Thorpe, SBS World News.
Millions of students across the world have returned to school today for the first time in months after long coronavirus lockdowns. From France to Russia and China, children started their day a little differently, getting used to all the new safety protocols.
It's a sign life is truly returning to normal in Wuhan. Children are heading back to school. They've endured months of remote learning ever since the virus took a hold here in January. Now the city's 1.4 million students can finally be with their friends again, albeit socially distanced and with more hand washing.
I'm very thrilled and excited. I hope that in the new semester our study can go smoothly and safely amid the pandemic.
There's strict rules in place to make sure that's the case, with temperature testing and mask wearing all part of the new normal. Students in France were a little timid on their first day back. Every teacher and child aged over 11 required to wear a mask, even in the classroom.
Donc souvent on le voit aux expressions et là, oh, je ne vois que les yeux. Donc ça c'est pas évident.
France is still recording thousands of new cases a day, but authorities say the social and emotional well-being of children outweigh the health risks, and parents seem to agree.
Bien sûr, mais essayer de reprendre un rythme normal, une vie normale, et puis apprendre à vivre dans ce contexte.
There were hugs goodbye across Europe today as school resumed in Belgium, Hungary and England too. Parents and children in Russia marked the new term with a traditional ceremony.
Я хочу, чтобы этот день был счастливым и светлым праздником для вас.
That's despite cases in the country surpassing 1 million overnight. The government insists schools are safe. But in New York, educators there aren't so sure. Commencement of class in North America's largest public school system delayed by officials.
Heard from everyone in our schools that have said we need some more time.
Teachers demanding more COVID-safe plans be implemented, as well as more testing.
We need mandatory testing for all teachers, all students, and they need to be rapid tests.
The city's 1.1 million school students will now return on September 21st. Amelia Dunn, SBS World News.
A border community has been left devastated by a fire that's destroyed its only supermarket, butcher and clothing store. Mungandai is part of the current Queensland COVID bubble, with one side of the town in New South Wales. The loss of the stores means locals will now have to leave the area to access essential supplies. Fire crews say no one was injured in the blaze and investigations are underway. A GoFundMe page has been launched to help rebuild the stores. A legal loophole that saw mining giant Rio Tinto destroy a 46,000-year-old sacred Indigenous site in Western Australia is one step closer to being closed. Let's cross live now to our Western Australia correspondent, Aaron Fernandez. Good evening, Aaron. Tell us, what is the WA government's solution to all of this?
Well, Janice, the WA government promised to strengthen the state's Aboriginal heritage laws after Rio Tinto legally destroyed Aboriginal heritage sites earlier this year. Today, it released a draft version of its Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill, and under the existing legislation, under Section 18 of the existing legislation, mining companies and other land users could apply to destroy Aboriginal sites, even against the wishes of traditional owners. The WA Aboriginal Affairs Minister Ben Wyatt today said under the new proposed laws that ability would be removed and fines of up to $10 million could apply.
This has taken 2.5 years of consultation and effort to release this draft bill. It's focused around doing things that the current Act doesn't do, bringing Aboriginal people into the centre of management of Aboriginal heritage sites.
Janice, the laws that were announced today are in draft version only. The WA government will now begin stakeholder consultations across the state and hopes to bring a final version of the bill to the state's parliament by the end of the year. Janice.
Thanks so much, Aaron Fernandez, updating us from Perth. Returning to our top story now, and Australia's record run of economic growth has come to an end as we officially enter a recession. SBS finance editor Ricardo Gonçalves is back with more. Ricardo, unfortunately, it'll be a long road ahead for many small businesses.
Janice, business owners have borne the brunt of the economic downturn as household spending collapsed during the June quarter and no state or territory was spared. The biggest hit was taken by New South Wales and Victoria, both contracting by more than 8% as restrictions shut down large parts of the economy. And with the impact of Melbourne's stage 4 lockdowns yet to be seen, some businesses fear the worst is yet to come.
The sound of cleaning machines has replaced children's screams at the 12 Lollipops Playland sites across Victoria. Some might never reopen.
I think I could lose up to 10. Now, that's a huge amount of sites that were profitable.
Debt is now stacking up for the business. In Victoria alone, it expects to owe $750,000 in rental payments by the end of this year.
In the end, if the landlords demand the rent and there's no money there, you can't get blood out of a stone, we'll have no choice but to close the sites.
The pain is being felt across the country. Anju Goyal's Sydney boutique specialises in clothing, which is made in India. She's still paying 50 of her warehouse staff.
We have to pay them because we can't say that there's no work and we can't say that you go and starve. You know, you have to pay them for their everyday living.
From an average of 15 wedding fittings a week, she's now lucky to do 2 a month.
It's so exciting to come to work, you know, but now it's so depressing. You keep, when you come to the store, you don't even want to design more designs because You don't want to just keep on adding stock.
Customer-facing businesses have been the hardest hit, with many forced to shut or alter trading conditions. The uncertainty causing many to defer or cancel investment decisions in an attempt to preserve capital. Advocates have urged the federal government to continue supporting the sector by implementing a revenue contingent loan scheme.
Fundamentally, what that means is a loan that you don't start paying back until your business revenue is above a predetermined amount. It might be 80% of what it was last year, but that can be a negotiated number.
Victoria's second wave is expected to delay the national recovery, but many states are starting to bounce back as restrictions ease.
Hopefully in the fourth quarter, Melbourne and Victoria are coming fully out of their lockdown and the recovery can spread more evenly across the national economy.
But it's set to be a long road to recovery for many businesses. Adrian Archuli, SBS World News.
And economists expect the September quarter GDP will be flat. So what does a recession mean for you? While it's characterised by a period of high unemployment, the Reserve Bank had already previously stated that interest rates are likely to remain at record lows for some years. The share market has rebounded, and after a heavy sell-off yesterday, investors returned today. The 200 added 1.8%, and since the March low, shares are up 33%.
What's really interesting is to notice that the share market normally leads the normal economic reality by 6 to 9 months. So that's why we've seen the share market rebounded since March, because March is when it realizes it was a recession, and then since then we've been looking forward.
Of our major stocks, the blue chips did well. The likes of BHP, CSL and Transurban finished in the black. AMP added nearly 5% after it announced a review of its assets. The Australian dollar lost a little ground against the US, with some economists saying today's worse than expected GDP result may prompt the RBA to further cut official interest rates. The consumer watchdog has issued a warning for fuel retailers as margins hit an all-time high during the June quarter. In its latest petrol monitoring report, the ACCC says petrol prices fell on average across our 5 major capitals to a 2-decade low of 109 cents per litre. For every litre of petrol sold, the bulk went towards taxes and the cost of the fuel itself. Another 10% covered other wholesale costs, and a record 15% made up the gross indicative retail differences, which is an indicator of gross retail margins.
We think that's due to 2 reasons. One is higher costs, but the other is higher profits to retailers. And that's a trend we've seen for some time.
Demand for petrol fell 27% during the pandemic as lockdowns kept many people at home. And the Royal Australian Mint has launched the world's first $1 coin designed to be donated. The donation dollar features a green centre with a gold ripple, and while it can be used as legal tender, it's hoped it will remind Australians to give to charity in this current climate. 3 million have so far been produced. They went into circulation today, and given the pandemic, the Mint doesn't want people to go out of their way to search for them. But if you are using cash, especially, Janice, don't forget to wash your hands.
Sage advice. Thanks so much, Ricardo. Well, coming up next, a coup for Queensland. The AFL Grand Final finds a new home. And counterfeit crackdown. How politicians plan to stamp out fake Indigenous art.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute finance thanks to Western Union. Easy international money transfers.
This heat is absolutely brutal.
Levison Wood journeys through scorching sands and rugged mountains to reveal a vibrant picture of life in Arabia through the stories of its people.
This feels like a real Arabia.
Discover how 5,000 years of history has influenced its rich culture and brutal conflicts.
They lost their country. They lost everything.
Arabia with Levison Wood starts tonight 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
Did your fees just go on? Something's wrong.
Every system is susceptible to viruses.
Something was in my head.
The feed controls too much.
Every day, millions of people trust Western Union to send money. With the Western Union app, you can now send money easily around the world. Send money online to a bank account for no sender or receiver transfer fees. Download the app. Western Union.
At least Carl's life insurance meant Beck doesn't have to worry about the finances on top of everything else.
You know, we haven't sorted ours out yet. Did she say who they were with?
Yeah, they were with Real Life Insurance.
Then let's give them a call.
With Real Life Insurance, simply choose a benefit from $100,000 up to $1 million that gets paid to your family if you're diagnosed with a terminal illness or pass away. Call 139 519 or search Real Life Insurance.
Easy on yourself.
Chemist Warehouse are having a massive flash sale. This Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, get an extra 10% off all big brands store-wide. That's right, an extra 10% off store-wide for 3 days only at Chemist Warehouse.
More than ever, it's important to keep up with the world's headlines. And as news gets better here, you can send money to your loved ones when they need it most, leaving you to get the whole story. Western Union. Easy international money transfers.
All of my mother's family were murdered in concentration camps.
He died of a head injury. I have been told that my father was the cause of his death.
Well, I've heard my father was a spy. So who is this man?
Hosted by Noni Hazelhurst.
It's a human right to know who your parents are.
It's amazing to see your father for the first time.
Every Family Has a Secret starts Tuesday, 22nd of September on SBS and on demand.
Tonight, the battle for yellow continues as the race heads to the Pyrenees. The Tour de France continues tonight 9:30 on SBS and on demand.
The federal government says it'll crack down on the sale of fake Indigenous artwork. A parliamentary report into the issue in 2018 found 80% of Aboriginal souvenirs sold in Australia aren't genuine, something that's not only offensive to First Nations people but also hurts them economically.
For Indigenous cultures, art is central to identity. It is, for us, truth-telling, our journey, our history, our perspective.
But let's be very clear, the creation and sale of what purports to be Indigenous art, but in fact is not, is abhorrent and offensive.
Digital labelling technology will be trialled to help ensure the authenticity of Indigenous products, and further funding will be allocated to the Indigenous Arts Code. The value of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander language has been the focus of today's Indigenous Literacy Day. For the first time in its 10-year history, children from right across the country tuned in virtually to mark the occasion. 8 new children's books in language were also released. The National Day helps raise much-needed funds to provide books to remote communities, and program ambassadors say it's vital that First Nations children can access reading materials in their first language.
Children who have Aboriginal language as their first language, to be able to see it in a book is just magical, and it's a really special part of our language.
The Indigenous Literacy Foundation has now published 100 children's books written in an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander language. To the day in sport now, and for the first time in its 123-year history, the AFL Grand Final will be played outside of Victoria. The Gabba in Brisbane will host the decider next month, to be played at night. Officials are hopeful around 30,000 supporters will be able to attend.
Melbourne's loss is Brisbane's gain.
So it is my pleasure to formally announce that the 2020 Toyota AFL Grand Final will be played in Queensland at the Gabba.
For the first time, the biggest game on the AFL calendar will be held interstate at night in front of 30,000 fans on October 24. The NRL stronghold rewarded for its role in saving the 2020 AFL season.
We're absolutely delighted. We're over the moon. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we're not going to let anyone down.
We hope that the way that the AFL divvy up
The tickets allows fans who support the teams to be in attendance. We hope it's not just corporates and neutrals at the game.
But in a year full of change, there's a contingency plan in case of a COVID outbreak. Either fewer fans at the Gabba or a move to Adelaide Oval, meaning WA's bid was the least successful of them all. The Borders to blame.
It is an absolute travesty that the AFL once again is abiding by its first rule, which is always finding a way to do over Western Australia by sending the grand final to Queensland. It's not even a football state.
It's another, albeit inevitable, blow for Victoria.
The atmosphere around grand final time is pretty good, so it'd be disappointing to miss that.
What can we do? It's like losing a child.
The Victorian Tourism Industry Council says that one game is worth $50 million in tourism revenue alone.
The notion that we could have a kind of business as usual or anything like a business as usual grand final this year, it's sad, but it's the truth, and you have to be upfront about that.
The AFL has made it clear this year's interstate grand final is very much a one-off event, or at least until 2058. The Victorian government extending its hold on the event by a year after missing out this year. Importantly, Victorians will still get their grand final public holiday next month. The exact time of the grand final is still to be decided, so too are the locations of the other matches in the finals series. Rachel Carey, SBS World News.
To cycling now, and Primož Roglic has returned to form at the Tour de France with victory on stage 4. Last month, the Slovenian crashed out of the Criterium de Dauphiné. While leading, Roglic countered an attack by Guillaume Martin on the final climb to the summit finish. France's Julien Alaphilippe finished 5th to retain the yellow jersey. And tonight's Stage 5 will feature a 183-kilometre ride to Privas. It offers a slightly uphill finish that could disrupt some sprinters. And a reminder, our live coverage on SBS commences at 9:30 p.m. in the east. There's also, of course, live streaming on SBS On Demand, and you can check your local guides for further details. Finally, in sport, Serena Williams has taken her first steps towards a record-equalling 24th Grand Slam title. The 38-year-old defeated Christiane in straight sets to move through to the second round at the US Open. Williams is looking to equal Margaret Court's Grand Slam total in a field missing 6 of the world's top 10 players. Meanwhile, Australia's Alex de Minaur made a triumphant start to his campaign, the Australian #1 posting a straight sets win over Slovakian Andre Martin. He next faces Richard Gasquet later this week. Coming up, the weather details and a small bird that can move mountains. The surprising discovery about this hard-working Australian species.
Levison Wood journeys through scorching sands and rugged mountains to reveal a vibrant picture of life in Arabia through the stories of its people. Arabia with Levison Wood starts next on SBS. Behind the walls of a British institution.
For me, it's about the legends and the myths and the stories that we tell here.
You're here to make sure history never dies.
Secrets of the Tower of London starts tomorrow 8:30 on SBS and On Demand.
Your spare pair. Your new style of hair pair. The flying through the air pair. We could all use a second pair. At Specsavers, get 2 designer pairs, no gap, from the $199 single vision range when you're with selected health funds.
Responding to Davis Lane, Ashburg, crew strength of 4, OIC captain over. Potential for the fire could be a couple of calls. Looks like the wind's changed again. There's going to be a front. Half an hour away. They're having trouble sourcing. You are currently on your own. I repeat, you are currently on your own. Okay, guys, get on your gear on. Steve, you're on the front. You guys in the back. Get on the hoses. Come on, let's go. Stay safe. Stay safe.
got like car payments, rent.
You losers budgeting again? We can finance if we want to. We can leave our friends behind.
Get on top of your money with ANZ's Financial Wellbeing Check-In.
Want visibly hydrated skin? Try L'Oreal Paris from Chemist Warehouse. It leaves skin looking deeply hydrated, more plump and smoother from day one. L'Oreal Paris Revitali Filler Serum is just $22.47. Live, look, feel fabulous at Chemist Warehouse.
If this is what healthier looks like, well, sign me.
If she wants us to take her seriously, she must learn to calm down.
She is the actor's actor.
Shall I be mother?
Celebrate Meryl Streep with 5 career-defining movies over 5 nights.
I am not for the knackers yet.
Focus on Meryl Streep. Tonight, 9:35 on SBS World Movies. There's a world of stories available for free at SBS On Demand. Download the app or visit the website today. SBS On Demand. A world of difference.
It's time to check the weather details now. In the major centres, partly cloudy skies for Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra and Darwin. Cloudy skies in Perth, showers and a bit of wind about Melbourne, light showers developing in Hobart and a shower or two clearing in Adelaide. Further afield, fine and bright in Auckland and Christchurch, partly cloudy in Wellington, some rain to hit Samoa. In Southeast Asia, thunder on the way for Singapore and Bangkok, drizzle in Jakarta and Denpasar, rain in Phnom Penh. Let's head further north, rain for Seoul, Manila, Taipei and Hanoi, cloudy in Beijing, fine and bright in Hong Kong and Shanghai. Heading west, rain to soak Mumbai, Delhi and Islamabad. It'll be grey in Tehran, fine in Jerusalem. To Europe now, cloudy skies in Paris and Berlin, partly cloudy in Istanbul and Belgrade, foggy in Rome and rain on the way for London and Stockholm. To Africa, it'll be wet in Addis Ababa, bright skies for Casablanca, thunder in Dakar, foggy in Johannesburg and a few showers in Nairobi. To South America, a few showers to soak Lima and La Paz, cloudy in Buenos Aires, rain in Caracas and Bogota. And for North America, thunder to roar through New York and Dallas, cloudy in Toronto and a few showers for Mexico City. Well, of all the songbirds in the world, few are as accomplished as the Australian superb lyrebird. David Attenborough once described them as the most elaborate, the most complex and the most beautiful in the world. And now researchers have learnt there's much, much more to this incredible species.
A masterful mimic, the superb lyrebird has one of the most sophisticated voice skills in the animal kingdom. And now scientists have learnt it can do much more than sing and copy calls.
They're actually a really important species in ecosystems, and it all comes from their ability to move huge amounts of soil when they forage for invertebrate food.
In fact, they can move as much as 155 tonnes of earth and leaf litter a year. Researchers who tracked the bird's movements over 2 years through Victoria's southern highlands say that's more than any other land animal.
And they do this by scratching through with really powerful claws and kicking the litter and soil and burying it. And through this, a single lyrebird in the Dandenong Ranges, for example, would move the approximate amount of litter and soil that would be carried by about 11 dump trucks worth.
And all that hard work is crucial to the overall health of the wet forests where they live.
The species that have evolved with lyrebirds have come to rely on them creating conditions that are suitable for them.
More than 40% of their habitat was destroyed during last summer's bushfire. Conservationists say the superb lyrebird should be given special priority, not just for its survival, but for the survival of the other animal and plant life which rely on its environmental engineering. Brooke Fryer, SBS World News.
Recapping our top stories now, Australia has plunged into its deepest ever recession and its first in nearly 3 decades. The economy shrank 7% in the June quarter. That's the biggest contraction since records began in 1959. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the economy has been savaged by the COVID-19 global pandemic. US President Donald Trump has visited Kenosha, Wisconsin, despite local leaders urging him to stay away. He's described the city's protests as acts of domestic terror and expressed his support for law enforcement. That's the world this Wednesday. If you missed any of tonight's bulletin, you can always catch up on the SBS News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on our apps. But I'll be back with news updates throughout the evening. Good night.
I'm writer and photographer Levison Wood.
This heat is absolutely brutal.
I've had a lifelong fascination with the Middle East.
Can't be many places in the world that look like this.
I'm taking a journey around the Arabian Peninsula, travelling 5,000 miles through 13 countries.
The scenery's changed to endless desert. This feels like the real Arabia.